Good to see you again. Welcome to the program. I'm Felicity Ijekhuemen. There is some disagreement among legal practitioners and scholars about whether corporations have duties under international law. A scholar at the University of Witwatersrand, Bonita Meyersfeld, writes that there are arguments that only states are bound by international law, and it is those states which are obliged to regulate how businesses operate within their borders. Corporations have only a voluntary responsibility to avoid committing human rights violations through their operations. In a recent paper, Bonita looked at the role of multinational corporations in benefiting from and perpetuating structural poverty in the global south. She argues that international law can no longer exempt corporations from liability for human rights violations, including those arising from poverty. Under certain circumstances, she further argues, corporations should have duties under international law to ensure human rights are fulfilled. Her submission is that international human rights law must be developed to impose duties directly on multinational corporations to alleviate poverty in developing countries where they operate. We'll be taking a look at her presentation on the conversation on one slot. To discuss this, we're joined by Kehinde Adegboyega, Executive Director, Human Rights Journalist Network, Nigeria, and Josephine Ijekhuemen, a legal practitioner, Lagos. She is here in Lagos with us. Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I will start with the lady. You are a legal practitioner. I believe you've also seen Bonita's submissions. Is it true that businesses have a long history of profiting from human rights abuses? Josephine, the question is for you. Okay, I think there's a switch in the audio. We apologize for this mix-up. Let's see if we can get Kehinde up instead. Kehinde, if you can hear me, can you acknowledge? Good evening. All right, please go ahead and talk to us about, I mean, you saw that publication on the Conversation Africa. What's your thinking about the claim that corporations have long exploited poverty in Africa?
Yes. You can see it everywhere, in Congo, in Nigeria, and recently we commemorated the death of the 8 Ogoni leaders, which includes Kehinde, and it's a part of, we know why Kehinde was killed during the military era, so it's a part of the reason why, and unfortunately, why Kehinde was killed, it still exists in the Ogoni region, in the Niger Delta region. The international corporations are still violating human rights. They are not concerned about the indigenous people of the communities that they work. You can see similar things in Congo and all that. Which, unfortunately, Africa is so blessed, but you can't see it in the lives of the people there. Recently, there was a major line mine at a mining. I've forgotten which of the country now. At a major mining area, I read thousands of people are trapped in that mining area. This continues to happen more than 50 years in Africa, and it seems it's something that the big corporations, the international corporations, are not taking responsibility for. And also because of African governments are overlooking the responsibility that, so like for instance, the Nigerian government have been several times been asked to ensure that those polluted areas be cleaned up. But unfortunately, nothing has been done. Several governments have come and made several promises to do that, but nothing has been done. So it's a major concern for every African, and I think it's a major issue that we need to address. Thank you.
Okay, on what side of the divide of this argument are you on? Because on the one hand, it's not that these corporations don't have some responsibility, but Bonita's argument is it has to be directly to this corporation and not through the states, because I think at the heart of our argument was that states are already failing in their responsibility to uphold the part of the agreement to take care of the people. So what part of the argument are you on? Do you subscribe to the states as status quo, or do you subscribe that these corporations are taxed specifically for human rights violations?
Can you hear me? Can you come in?
Kehinde, did you get my question?
Yes, I was thinking she wants to respond. But
no, I'm still with you. I will come to Josephine in a sec.
Okay, so I'll just give my brief response. I will not stand for or against, because unfortunately, we cannot wait for a multilateral organization like the UN or the African Court or the ECOWAS Court to get justice for us. We can't wait for that. The states, the national government needs to take responsibility on human rights violations of their citizens. We cannot wait, even as much I believe all mechanisms must be used, like we've seen in other issues where people have had to go to the ECOWAS court, taking government to ECOWAS court if they are not seeking justice at their national court. However, we must start from home. We cannot neglect, we cannot continue to pamper our national government. They are responsible. Most times they are the ones that invited these international corporations. They are the ones that give them the rules and guidelines on how to operate. We must first hold them responsible for the human rights violations that is happening all over Africa. So the government of Africa should be first held responsible for whatever is happening to their people.
All right, okay, I might just say I put you a bit on the spot there, because I was waiting for Josephine to come on and just help us as a legal practitioner establish some of the basic ground for us to, ride on with this conversation. Josephine, if you can hear me, can you just confirm before I go ahead and ask?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you. All right. Okay. You've seen that submission by Bonita. I want you for
there's something that I want to point out. For the states are so. Pardon?
Okay, just hold on. I was trying to craft a question for you to respond to. Okay. I'm saying that I believe you've seen the submission by Bonita, but for the sake of our viewers who are just tuning in and don't know what what we're talking about, could you just help us establish some basics as to what the current law is when it comes to corporations and their responsibility to alleviating poverty and addressing human rights abuses?
To be frank, I read Bonita's reports. I agree with some of her submission, and there are some that I disagree with. First of all, I agree with her in the area of some corporations tend to operate in an environment that breeds poverty. I think they feel that is where they are able to make more profits. An environment that is undeveloped, underdeveloped, or they can negotiate, and they have the unwieldy power to negotiate with the government in order to take over the commonwealth of the nation, and the people are not empowered enough to fight for their rights. But in the other vein, I think we should understand that the states are sovereign. Sovereignty of a nation gives the powers and the responsibilities to the nation. to determine what happening within the nation. If, for example, the power is given directly to the responsibility is given directly to corporations to enforce human rights or to promote human rights within their environment. How is it enforced without the state mechanisms? How is it going to be enforced? The thing is, there are laws in Nigeria, several legislations on fundamental human rights, which applies to all citizens of the country. It also applies to corporations working within the Nigerian environment, and speaking specifically to Nigeria. For example, our labor laws, our laws dealing with running a corporation in Nigeria provides that an employer or a company must provide certain parameters for their workers. For example, a safe working environment, wage, giving them rights under the Nigerian Constitution. Unfortunately, because of the underdevelopment of our country, we see that our government is, in a way, is kind of not enforcing the provisions of the law, not pushing the companies that are coming in from outside of the country, be it in the mining sector, in the oil sector, to apply the fundamental human rights provisions. There are some companies within Lagos where I practice that have enslaved their workers. They are not allowed to unionize. They have casual workers. Somebody will be.
Josephine, I think that is also at the heart of the argument that Bonita is putting up. As you're speaking, I was looking at her submission under international law. She referenced the Professor John Ruger United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And rightly, like you pointed out, the states are supposed to have this responsibility, which is what is operational. And the framework that was presented by the prof would work in an ideal scenario. She's saying that the framework relies on 3 factors, but that cannot work in a situation that we have in Africa where leaders are not taking responsibility. So she's, advocating for the international and global corporations to take direct responsibility as one way of addressing the problem. Am I correct in that assumption, or what do you?
They can't do that. They cannot do that. That means they want to take over the running of a country. They can't do that. I understand her submission, but you should understand that particular laws that deal with economic, social, cultural rights are within some aspects of our constitution, for example, in Nigeria, that are non-justiciable. If you are now insisting that corporation should enforce these laws when the government of the country is not even enforcing it for its citizens, it's problematic. There are some laws, the political, socio-cultural rights, which I believe are justiciable, and I believe are also part of international legal instruments, convention that Nigeria is a part of, which can be enforced directly in Nigeria and also at international scenes like international courts. So asking the international bodies to make a legislation that will ensure that companies operating under the laws of a particular country are subject to international law is taking the control out of the power, taking the sovereignty out of the hand of a country. This will be challenged.
All right,
it's an unfortunate situation.
Josephine, you've put up your part of the argument. Perhaps you could help us, if it is not too much of a chore, to talk a bit about this UN guideline principle of business and human rights. What role does this play in perpetuating profiteering? Because you have said, I'm still going to ask the question at the end of the day. Government is failing. Corporations are failing. But just explain this for us and then we'll take it from there.
It's just to provide a situation where companies that are operating within a particular environment will promote, respect, protect dignity, the human rights, and protect the citizens of the country where they work or their employers. I think there was a time in 2015, there was a bill at the National Assembly, I think it's the Corporate Social Responsibility Bill, that was trying to inculcate some of these practice into legislature, but it hasn't been passed. I think in that bill, it was recommended that 2 to 5% of the profits of these companies will be used towards providing certain things for the community, like building hospitals, providing roads, building schools. In essence, economic, social, cultural rights items will be provided by the company as a matter of law, but this is not yet law in Nigeria. But there are several legislations within which the Nigerian government can come in and hold a company responsible when there's an infringement of the rights of the citizens of the country. Some of the laws are found under the criminal codes. Some of them are found under the Nigerian Constitution. The Nigerian government still has the power. The government still has the power in several countries to hold companies accountable for infringement of fundamental human rights incidents within their operations in their environments. So it's not the only problem we have is the willingness, and even when the government is willing, how far the government is willing to take it in order to protect its citizens and to ensure that these laws within the country is carried out to the letter. Thank you.
All right, and Kehinde, let me come to you now. Josephine has been able to put forward an argument about, Bonita, at least that's my interpretation at the moment. Bonita might have it a bit skewed. She has some points, but asking that corporations are held directly takes away the responsibility and the part that the state plays in this whole scenario. Based on her submission and what you saw in the presentation by Bonita, on what part of the divide do you stand? It's really a tightrope, really. The states are failing, the corporations seem to be hiding under it and continuing to profit.
So, like I did try to mention in my presentation, that I know that the states should be held responsible for violations in their sovereign area. But however, we cannot undermine the power of international and multilateral organizations in ensuring that these international corporations are held responsible for violations. And I was doing a bit of research, and I noticed that Ericsson, a Swedish telecommunication infrastructure provider, was investigated by U.S. Federal Security Regulator for allegedly paying money to members of Islamic State in Iraq. So there are beyond the local legislation. Countries where those multinationals, they always have a route. They come from one country or the other, have taken legal action against violators in the past. In this case, international corporations. So I think it's an opportunity for, even if the African government are folding their hands, they are not taking responsibility, just also because they are benefiting from the violations that are happening. We cannot overemphasize is that whatever violations that continues to happen in African soil is because African governments allow it, and indirectly or indirectly, they are benefiting from those violations. So I will encourage that we will seek further ways of getting redress. It has to be at an international court. Although I know that there are limitations, like for instance at ICC, you can only take war crime issues, government and all that. But there are still cases where multinational companies are taken to their countries of origin, and the justice has been gotten from those courts. So it's I think even with the Ogoni issue there, I can't remember the country that they came beyond the African soil, because unfortunately, even in Nigeria, with the bastardization of the environment, pollution of the environment, the community are yet to get justice. Their soil, their land are yet to be cleaned, but people are still exploring international opportunities to seek redress. It might be an option that we might need to emphasize, because it seems that African governments are getting weaker because they need loans for IMF and all those. They need subservience from these international corporations. So recently, I don't want to mention the oil company. They are existing in Nigeria very soon, and they have been and human rights organizations have been saying they must protect labor laws, even if they are existing a country.
All right, Josephine, let me
we
come
must
back
emphasize
to you.
that these human rights violations cannot continue, even though our African government have refused to do something about it.
Well, they have to do something about it. Nobody can come from the outside and solve our problems for us in real terms. But are there areas, Josephine, that international law could hold corporations accountable for human rights violations in Africa?
Yes, there are. You know, some of these international corporations, they are registered maybe in their home countries. They are also subjected and they are bound by the laws in their country. I think the other speaker mentioned about some a corporation that was sued in a U.S. court for donating money to a so-called terrorist organization. And there are some international courts, international settings where these corporations can be held accountable, and where even there are also international bodies, NGOs, activists that can act as a pressure group to ensure that these international organizations, who are fond of going to underdeveloped countries and sowing the seed of poverty with the help of the government, who are not responsible or responsive to their citizens' needs and cries, they are made a show of in other environments where laws are binding in those countries. So the citizens that are aggrieved can go to ECOWAS, or the African Commission, and other international environments to lay their grievances against these erring companies. Yes, it's possible. It's very possible.
What specific
issue now is how
should...
do you now enforce? The problem now is enforcement. So because when there's another, we have environmental impact assessment laws in Nigeria, and some companies come to Nigeria and they devastate the environment, and some communities go outside of the forum to bring actions against this company for them to clean up the environment, to pay certain amounts. We see that when they get these judgments, the enforcement is still problematic. So for me,
how do we handle that situation then, Josephine? Because this is quite tricky. On the one hand, you support that states should hold on, and that corporations should not have a direct the international law should not have like a direct contact with corporations, as in having them take their responsibilities directly away from the state. So how do we now do enforcement? The hungry man cannot go to an international court or ECOWAS court. They are believing that the people that are supposed to do that, and that is the leaders in the state, will do something about it. So what would be your candid thoughts on how enforcement can be better managed?
I think, number one, I believe that any action by organizations or communities against these companies should also include the government as a defendant. They should also include the government as a defendant. And then the government has signed to several international treaties, multilaterals and bilateral agreements. So these international bodies can act as a pressure group through several methods, which includes sanctions, which includes cancellation of or threat of trade agreement being pulled or loans not being given, to force the government to enforce these judgments. That is the only way the judgments will not be rendered useless at the end of the day.
All right, we'll come to you, Kehinde, but let me just stay with Josephine for the remaining part of this first half. Speak to us about some specific duties that corporations should have under international law in order for them to uphold human rights.
For example, under the International Labour Organization law convention, there are certain international guidelines for labor law, for example, management, safe environment, dignity, giving people freedom of association, freedom of negotiation or whatever. If these international organizations are going to be in our country, they are also bound by the International Labour Organization Convention. Nigeria is a signatory to this convention. While they are carrying out.
All right. Well, let's go for a short break. We will come back and continue the conversation. I will be asking Kehinde about, what governments can do to ensure that corporations operating in their countries respect human rights, among other issues. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Very glad you're still with us. We're still looking at the argument around the role of corporations, holding them accountable for profiteering of poverty in Africa, human rights abuses, where the state seem to be failing in an ideal scenario, as the UN has put forward in its framework for business for these corporations. The states are supposed to hold the fort for the citizens, but that is not the case. I think that is at the heart of Bonita's arguments. But we have two guests helping us get, some perspective, so we know what part of this argument we can align more with. We have Kehinde Adegboyega, Executive Director, Human Rights Journalist Network, Nigeria. We also have legal practitioner Josephine Ijekhuemen. She's been speaking to us and helping us, get better understanding of the concept before us. Before we went on that break, I did say I will be speaking to Kehinde specifically about what or how African governments can ensure corporations operating in their countries respect human rights.
Thank you very much. Like Josephine had mentioned, there are some local laws that can be used to ensure that these international corporations work within the law. But we need to, I think a major issue that we need to also address is corruption. So sometimes we know what happens within the African government, some of these government agencies, that by the time someone has been bribed, when they're supposed to go for environmental assessment or reports of violations, when someone has been bribed, so we need to deal with corruption, so that the work, what is supposed to be done is to be done. Like for instance, labor rights are supposed to be protected. Number one. The communities that those international corporations work, and especially when they have a major impact in their livelihood, their rights are supposed to be protected too. So if there are limitations in any way in existing law that is supposed to address it, this is the time that I think our legislators are supposed to go back to the drawing board and fight through those laws to ensure that we protect our environment. Because at the end of the day, when we keep saying, oh, we are overlooking this violation, it will become a major issue at our front, like what we have in the Niger Delta, that a lot of communities don't have access to clean water, and some of them their their livelihood is based on the waters, like fishing and all that. They can't do that anymore because most of the fish are just, they don't have access to water. And there was a time that we heard that there was a major meet in Port Harcourt because of the activities of oil exploration. These are negligence and trying to overlook these violations have a lot of catastrophic impact in the future, especially our health. There are a lot of diseases. We are seeing high increase in issues around cancer and all those and airborne diseases because of these violations that African governments have refused to address. We must ensure that whatever they try to do, whether profit or whatever, the major interest of any African government should be their people, because without your people, you have no future. Without them not being healthy, you can't build a nation. So, like I want to emphasize that if there are any limitations on any law that we presently have that is not helping to address this gap that is allowing for human rights violation, this is the time to go back to the drawing board and look at these laws. And we must deal with corruption. Government officials must do their job diligently so that human rights of citizens, people that are working with these multinational companies, and the indigenous people that are living around that environment, their rights are protected. Thank you.
Kehinde, I hope I live to the ripe age of seeing government officials being diligent in their responsibilities and actually getting rid of corruption. That will be the day. Anyway, let me go back to Josephine. You spoke earlier. You mentioned including states in cases, but what about regional bodies like AU, ECOWAS? What role should they play in promoting corporate accountability, if any?
If you take an example from Niger Republic and Chad, that decided that they don't want to be part of the AU anymore because of what happened, how they took over the government, the elected government of the country. I do not see how the African Union have been so strong in persuading or in getting democracy back into those countries. You see, the thing with the unfortunate incident of the lack of the corporate social responsibility among the international corporations within our context is because our government has enabled them, provide them an environment where they are allowed to maximize profits at the cost of human lives and environmental degradation. So until what Kehinde has rightly said, until poverty and corruption is eliminated or minimized, it will still be very difficult to get those that are responsible to ensure that human rights are respected, the rights and dignities of the citizens are protected in our country.
That's AU,
still a problem.
Are there no other regional bodies that could be of any relevance in this matter, helping to prevent?
Like I said, what did they do when something happened in Niger and Chad? You can go there and get the African Commission. You can write a communication to the government. They can meet during the AU meeting to persuade. But what is the power of the AU actually to enforce human rights provisions? The only thing it can do is to maybe embarrass the government in a public forum. That the government does not respect the rights of its citizens. That itself may shame the government into taking proper action or taking the proper steps.
Okay. Kehinde, back to you. What strategies would you suggest that African countries can employ to prevent exploitation by corporations?
So I quickly want to add to the conversation around the multilateral organization. I understand that they seem like they are weak, but sometimes you can't throw the baby with the water with I can't remember how they mentioned. So we need to keep exploring whatever mechanism that we. Unfortunately, we also have an issue where the kind of government that we have, even maybe with other African governments, that they refuse to obey court order. So there are several court orders, even from the ECOWAS court, that civil actors have tried to go around human rights violations in Nigeria that the government have refused to obey. That's a major issue and is a major concern. But however, and it's also a global concern because, for instance, look at the war in Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Iran, Palestine, and we have UN, and some of these countries are even sitting on major high-level panel at this multilateral organization. You would have thought that how these human rights violations happening when you have this kind of people. Unfortunately, the word that we have, like, is it's unfortunate that we may not be able to get, but that does not mean that we cannot get justice. We cannot attempt to get justice because not speaking out or trying to say, oh, there's nothing we can do about this situation. Unfortunately, there's nothing, we should now keep quiet. It's going to be more dangerous for us because it's like allowing people to continue and not speaking out. Because when you speak out, you can't, the evildoer can, to some extent, say, oh, people are speaking out, I need to adjust. But when you keep silence, no, they think they will have the feed of the day. So what I'm saying is that we can use the local courts, number one. We can use the AU and every means, even concerning this country, the country that this multilateral or this international corporation comes from. We can write to their embassy, to their government, saying that this is what is happening, about what this are the human rights violations that are happening concerning the activities of this international corporation. The results may not happen overnight, like what is still happening in Niger Delta, or like what is still happening in Congo. But we need to keep trying. We need to keep pushing, taking off every opportunity, using protests, writing petitions, using every legal means at the local level, at the international level, everybody organizing citizens to speak about this issue. And we have the power of the social media to spotlight this issue. Also using the power of the media to set agenda like the way we are talking about these issues. Because, like for instance, there are a lot of issues in Nigeria now that people will say, oh, it's an international cooperation violation that I should be thinking about. But the media has a powerful way to set the agenda, to guess what people need to talk about. And that is what I think we can continue to do to address this issue. Thank you.
All right. Let me come back to you, Josephine. Back to our earlier submission, your submission, agreeing to some degree with Bonita about corporations' responsibility and that of the state. I missed this earlier, so I'm going to ask you. She says, suggesting steps forward, that not all corporations, like you pointed out, should have the same duties as states. And then she proposed factors that could determine when a corporation might have a duty under international human rights law to fulfill some socioeconomic rights. And she mentioned, and that's the one I want you to speak on, the extent of the violation, the position of vulnerability of the victim, the urgency of the situation, and whether, I think this is also important, the corporation is the only actor that can fulfill the rights at that time. So what's your thinking about her suggestions for next steps?
It's a given. If a corporation, for example, is committing war crimes and genocide, as part of its business. For example, if a country, a war-torn country, employs or engages the services of a corporation, a security corporation, and in the country they are committing war crimes and genocide and inhumane human rights abuses, it's given that corporation, along with its principal officers and the people that are directly involved, will be subject to international criminal prosecution. That is a given. If a company has direct correlation to the human rights abuse violation, it's involved in it, it's carrying it out, even without the local authorities engaging the corporation. And remember, when a corporation is registered in some countries, I will still talk about Nigeria, the corporation has a corporate, not, it's a personal, it's a person, a corporate person, and it also has vicarious liability for acts committed under its directive or under its direction as a, if any of its, if its staff commits any act as a director, part of the activity, the corporation has a vicarious liability, is responsible. So it's given already. Our recommendation is already in practice. I hope I've been able to explain it. Thank you.
Thank you. What mechanisms also, in your view, exist for victims of corporate human rights abuses to seek remedy and reparation?
They should take them to court. There are some levels of human rights abuses that are criminal. For example, if it involves assault or death or loss of bodily harm, the state can come in and then prosecute the corporation or its principal officers. But the victims or their survivors or families or the community are still, they still have the power to take the corporation to court for the violation of their fundamental rights. And I also say, as I will always say, the government and the officers responsible who allow, because there are some instances where Kehinde has mentioned where some officers are supposed to do certain things to prevent human rights abuses in communities and they are not doing that as a result of the corruption. They should also be held liable, both personally and by the government, for these violations. That is my recommendation.
Okay, Kehinde, I'll still come to you, please. Let me stay with Josephine for just one more moment. What reforms, as a legal person, do you think is needed to international law to ensure corporations uphold human rights? Are there areas that you think need more work?
Yes, there are. First of all, I think we should change some of our local laws that will inculcate this UN human rights business and the UN business and human rights practice guideline. Then we should, the international bodies, the UN agencies, the ILO agencies, the international bodies, they are empowered in a way to use several means to force both corporations and governments to obey these international instruments. And those are what I will ask activists like Kehinde to push for, so that when there's a UN meeting on human rights, activists are there, they are writing country reports, they are pushing for sanctions against corporations as well as governments. They are mentioning and talking about the complicity of the people that ensure that these human rights violations continue, that enables them to enable them to continue the cycle of poverty within the resource-rich environment in Sub-Saharan Africa. Is unfortunate. Resource-rich environment in Sub-Saharan Africa, as where their citizens are subjected to endemic poverty, it's unfortunate. So these are some of the steps that can be taken to alleviate the situation.
Let me come to you now and just ask. I mean, you've heard all that Josephine has said, How can African countries work together to advocate for some of these reforms that are needed and necessary to change the narrative about human rights abuses and poverty in the continent?
So I think the first step would be that we must become unselfish. I mean, from the citizens, from the politicians. So when we become unselfish, when we are not interested so much in the personal gain, but we are interested in the welfare of our people, we can now come together to say, oh, this, for instance, this Niger Delta issue, this pollution that is happening there, what can we do? How can we address it? How much do we need to embark to clean up this land? What are the steps that we must ensure that this violation should not continue? So that is a major step. We must be sincere with ourselves, because the reality is that we can't, the government cannot claim that they don't understand, they don't know the issues, that they don't know that some people are losing their livelihoods, while we are only interested in the cost of per barrel, the cost of per barrel in the international market, or how we use it to get collateral for loans. These are the real issues. People are being affected. Communities are being affected. People have lost life when there is a fire incident in those communities. Our government cannot deny that they are aware of this issue. So, but they need to put on that woman face and become unselfish to be able to address this issue and take a stand that this cannot continue. I want to also encourage the civil society, active citizens to show more interest and apply more pressure, because unfortunately, the kind of government, sorry to say, that we have now, they are so selfish. They are only desperate to get power and to retain power. We are the ones that will apply that pressure and say, no, you must pay attention to this. This must change. This cannot continue. Because, like I used to tell people, we may not need a God to say, let's not destroy the world. This human rights violation that we are allowing to happen may be what are the human factors that will end the world. But if you are not interested, if you don't want the world to end now by our own human activities, we must pay attention to these issues at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level, and at the AU level. We have representatives at all the multilateral organizations, at the ECOWAS level, at the AU level. Everybody must take responsibility and take action to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just before we wrap up, I would like your final thoughts on the subject matter, state versus corporation, and the I think you should speak more towards the seeming continuing failure to take real responsibility in addressing poverty and human rights abuses.
Yes, it's very, very, very painful. I have been to Congo and I saw the devastation in that environment. And there are so many corporate organizations that are mining diamonds there. The same thing in Nigeria, oil, diamonds, gold, tin. I went to Jos, there was a lot of craters that were filled with water. These are death traps. Our government are just interested, the sub-Saharan African government are just interested in getting powers for the sake of powers. And the unfortunate thing, they forgot that power is transient. The thing is, when they decide today that they do not care about their citizens, their lives, their human rights, their dignity, tomorrow they will also become citizens and they may find themselves in situations that they have created. If they do not solve it now, before it's too late, it will become a problem that they may not be able to handle in the future. That's just mine.
We do appreciate your submissions today. Many thanks to you both. Kehinde Adegboyega, Executive Director, Human Rights Journalist Network Nigeria, and Josephine Ijekhuemen, legal practitioner. We do appreciate your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Dear viewer, this conversation is only possible because of you. Please, you can watch this and other episodes of One Slot on News Central's YouTube channel. Don't forget to leave a comment, your thoughts on the subject matter. Until next time, please stay safe and be well.